We've heard a lot about what we think, so what does the rest of Europe think?
There will maximum be 2 years to negotiate. It could be done quicker. I would be in favour of a very quick solution to this.
Brussels won't be happy if we take the Tipex to Heath's signature. We'll look at what happens on Friday if we do. Former Tory leader and Brexiteer Michael Howard will take us through the mechanics. And we take our referendum truck to Bognor Regis to ask how old and young may differ. But is it a problem if you guys take us out and the young wanted to be in? Does that bother you, Jane?
I'm thinking beyond the next 5 or 10 years, which I don't think the politicians are. And I'm thinking for my grandchildren.
Hello, in 4 days' time we'll know, and more to the point, they will know too. The rest of the EU will find out what has hit it. The first meeting of the European Council is a week tomorrow. That's when the European reaction will be crystallised. If we vote to leave, they'll have a lot to talk about. Could it even be that the other 27 leaders meet ahead of time, or ask David Cameron to take a short walk while they work out a common line? The big question in the event of Brexit is what the new UK-EU relationship will look like. Then there's a smaller tactical question too. You'll hear a lot about it. Do we invoke Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty? Now, Article 50 provides for a nation to leave the EU. It gives us a system to negotiate our way out. But it imposes a time limit as well, and that may not be very helpful to the negotiation. Well, our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, has been visiting European capitals to get the view of Brexit from there.
Across Europe, the ministers and bureaucrats are thinking the unthinkable. A British exit from the EU may be imminent. We've been travelling through some key countries in Northern Europe, trying to get a handle on how they deal with it, what arguments they might deploy in talks. In Denmark, they know about saying no to the EU.
Denmark's vote against the Maastricht Treaty 24 years ago is just one example of when a referendum has derailed EU plans. And what's tended to happen in the past is that the Commission has gone back to the drawing board and crafted a new offer. So the first dilemma that other European countries would face if Britain voted for Brexit is whether to offer a better deal to the UK.
Former members of the Commission, the EU civil service, suggest it would be hard to come up with further concessions for the UK.
With all the challenges now, with the economic situation in Europe, with Russia and Putin, with the security issues, with terrorism, with immigrants, there would not be a lot of appetite to spend too much time on finding these solutions now, where, remember, the others think that they gave Britain basically what the British government asks for. They think they have been forthcoming already. So I just think it's still extremely risky what could happen after there would be a no.
Underlying all talks would be a fear of other nations trying to get their own bespoke deals.
I think, first of all, the Commission will try to avoid precedents. So they certainly would not support a solution which could create appetite for other member states to follow the British example.
For that reason, many European politicians feel further concessions after Britain's vote would be pointless and argue the 27 would want to move swiftly into Britain's exit talks.
In principle, I would say there should be no doubt that a no vote, that is, a vote to leave the EU, should be respected. And after that, I also think we should go for a quick decision. According to the EU treaty, there will maximum be 2 years to negotiate. it could be done quicker. I would be in favor of a very quick solution to this.
The Sicilienhof Palace was built in an English style a century ago, but is located in Potsdam in Germany. Allied leaders met here after the Second World War to shape the peace and to prevent Germany from rising again to military domination of Europe. The summits that would follow a Brexit, inevitably, nations would take different positions. European politicians tell us the French, the Italians and possibly the Spanish could be expected to want the toughest possible terms for Britain. The Scandinavians and Dutch, on the other hand, would want to be as reasonable as they could. And in between, synthesising those different positions and providing leadership, as in so many recent crises for the EU, would be Chancellor Merkel's Germany.
Germany will be very exposed in the EU, and Germany will get more or less automatically the only leadership role. Germany will be, whether Germany wants it or not, and I can tell you Germany does not want it, will have to accept leadership in the European Union, and I'm not sure whether this is something that British voters really want.
Contagion, Euroscepticism, is present in Germany too, of course. The AfD, or Alternative for Germany party, has been eating into the Chancellor's vote of late. The leader would rather Britain stayed in to fight for reform, and she believes the project as a whole is in serious trouble.
We already see that many projects of deeper integration have failed, as for example the euro, as the attempt to have a common migration policy or common social policies. So whatever EU Commission does, we'll see that the problems will become even more evident on a European level, and therefore I think with Britain or without Britain, the EU will have to change.
This is the Bundesrat, where the leaders of Germany's states or Länder meet. So once Britain invoked Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, triggering the exit process, what strategy would they advocate? If the views of Chancellor Merkel's minister-president in Hesse are anything to go by, even single market access on Swiss or Norwegian terms must be ruled out for Britain.
Also die Vorstellung, dass zum Beispiel der gemeinsame Markt weitergehen könnte, das halte ich für eine reine Illusion. Die Europäer möchten, dass die Briten dabei bleiben. Wenn die Briten sich entscheiden und sagen, wir gehen, dann ist das zu akzeptieren. Aber dann sind sie auch draus, und zwar komplett.
Another minister-president from Angela Merkel's party, though, took a more moderate line, arguing a way would have to be found to create a new relationship.
Europa ist ohne Großbritannien nicht denkbar. Und ich glaube, unabhängig davon, wie die Entscheidung ausfällt, muss es immer auch eine Zusammenarbeit, eine besondere Allianz auch geben in Europa.
In Berlin's fortress-like chancellery, Angela Merkel would have to balance those different views within her party and within the EU. Just how hard a bargain to drive, how far to protect German markets in the UK, versus prioritising the survival of the EU project as a whole.
Germany has an interest to show all the other Eurosceptics, let's say maybe parts of Denmark, the Netherlands, maybe the Poles, that they have something to lose. That's why they have to be tough on Britain after the Article 50 is invoked.
It might seem like the most wretched diplomacy imaginable. Stay in or we'll make an example of you. But today there are many here and elsewhere in Europe who insist they are in earnest.
Mark Urban there. Well, most of the other Europeans hope the Brexit scenario does not prevail. One person who hopes it does is Michael Howard, former Home Secretary, former leader of the Conservative Party. Now, Lord Howard, very good evening to you.
Good evening, Evan.
First of all, do you think if we vote for Brexit on Thursday, as I think you once said, it's worth pausing for a month to see if a better offer comes along, remaining in the EU, and then we maybe have a second referendum and discuss whether the new terms are acceptable?
I think there's something to be said for that. I don't think we would make any approach. We will have voted to leave. But if the Europeans came forward with some other offer which looked credible, I personally would be prepared to talk to them about it.
Even though we've just voted to leave, and it's a kind of, OK, guys, you can stay in.
No, well, it depends on what terms. And
what
of
would
course,
it be? What would it need to be to kind of, for a Prime Minister to go back to the country and say, look, let's just do it all again?
Yeah, look, it may not happen, and it would be up to them. I would not make any approach to them.
But what would it need to be to make it worth having a referendum?
It would need to be the fundamental and far-reaching reform which David Cameron originally asked for in his Bloomberg speech.
Okay.
Well, if that doesn't happen, there'd be no point in talking.
So on Friday, assuming that isn't going to happen, maybe you want to wait a few days to see if they're going to do that, but do you invoke Article 50?
I think I'm not in charge. It won't be my decision, but I think that's the logical thing to do, to invoke Article 50. I agree with Mr. Rasmussen, who said he thought it would be a rather quick negotiation. He was actually wrong when he said there's a 2-year limit, because the 2-year limit can be extended.
By unanimity, if
yes.
every single member agrees.
But,
okay.
Look, it's all this business of unanimity. It's Germany that calls the shots.
Right.
And if we got to 2 years and Angela Merkel was still in office and wanted it extended, it would jolly well be extended.
Just tell me why some on your side of this are keen not to invoke Article 50 very quickly, because clearly the official vote leave position is we don't need to do that for a while. We can pause, we can light a cigar, sit in the room and
well, I've said we can pause. Now, I agree with that. I agree with the pause.
But some are even saying, John Redwood has told this programme this afternoon, you don't ever have to invoke Article 50. Why do it? That is to respect the Treaty of Lisbon, which the people will have just rejected.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on every different position that all of my colleagues have taken on this. I've told you what I think should happen.
So we invoke Article 50 at a reasonable pace. Yeah. And it doesn't bother you that then the clock is ticking against us and that they can string it out, we get a worse deal.
What we've got to get into our heads is that we will not be supplicants. We are the 5th biggest economy in the world. Everyone wants access to it. They sell us much more than we sell them. They're not going to cut off their nose to spite their face.
Right. Your particular concern, the reason why you feel so strongly on the issue, is around the sovereignty of Parliament, and in particular the problems of the European Court of Justice, which basically can tell Parliament what it can do and what it can't do. Just explain that.
And it's about to do that. I think Thursday may be our last chance to vote for a democratic, self-governing country. People don't understand that the European Court of Justice now has the power to overrule acts of Parliament. It's already overruled an act of the Scottish Parliament, the first act actually passed by the SNP when it got a majority in the Scottish Parliament, and an act which was passed by our Parliament in 2014, which the Home Secretary said was critical to protecting children, fighting terrorism and combating crime, is coming before the European Court of Justice, of course not before Thursday, but in a few weeks' time, and they would be perfectly entitled, as things stand, to strike it out, to overrule it. And you know, Evan, there was a passage in the Queen's speech which said, the government pledges to uphold the sovereignty of Parliament and the primacy of the House of Commons. Those words are not worth the paper they're written on as long as we remain members of the European Union.
Right, and that's because if you join a club like that, somebody has to be the final arbiter between whether you've obeyed the rules of the club or not.
The key words are, if you join a club like that, I quite agree, if you have a club that's limited to economic issues, trade issues, you have to have some adjudication on the trade issues. But the Charter of Fundamental Rights goes far, far beyond that, and they can override practically anything that our Parliament would pass.
Now, I completely understand where you're coming from, and I understand the point you're making. There are many on your side of the debate who say, let us not wait for the 2 years to be up or the 4 years to be up while we negotiate our exit from the EU. We need, if we vote leave, to pass a bill amending the European Communities Act of 1972, where Ted Heath got us in. We need to amend that bill to stop the European Court of Justice, for example, being able to tell us whether we have our Data Protection Act or not, our Data Use Act or not. Now, Do you believe we should change the law before we've negotiated our exit, or should we wait till we've finally agreed an exit?
Well, we might well have to do that. And in my view, I think it would depend a bit on...
Do which?
We might well have to legislate before the end of the negotiations. Look, we're not going to wait. Suppose you had a 2-year period and then it was extended and so on. We're not going to wait forever. We're not going to wait for 4 years before making it clear that our Parliament is supreme. If the negotiation is a quick thing, and it should be. I mean, there's a free trade area from Iceland to Turkey. So the obvious solution to all these issues would be let's have a free trade area.
You are contemplating passing a law, Parliament passing a bill in breach of our treaty obligations.
If that's necessary, then I would support it.
And is this meant to be a way to a harmonious separation from the EU, or is this going to lead them to, for example, be well disposed to giving us a good deal?
Well, I don't think it would be necessary. If they want a harmonious relationship, which they should do and which we should do, it was Jacques Delors who said, if the United Kingdom does not want to agree to further European integration, we should have a different relationship with them, a friendly relationship.
How long do we give them before we start passing laws that basically unilaterally say, stuff you, we're not part of your club anymore, we're not negotiating?
First of all, I won't be in charge.
No, I know, but
and secondly,
give us some guidance.
You can't. Okay, well, it would be ridiculous to set out some arbitrary deadline.
Ridiculous? I'll tell you it is the official policy of Vote Leave that we should do this very quickly after we leave. Not waiting 2 years. We should, within weeks, I think, is my impression. We should say, sorry, guys, the European Court won't be telling us what to do.
I'm perfectly happy with that, because I have a fundamental objection to the European Court telling us what to do. It's fundamentally undemocratic.
So you want
we never did sign up to that. Tony Blair promised us that the Charter of Fundamental Rights did not apply to us. We never signed up to it. That's the point.
So you are happy with a position, as Vote Leave has suggested, that we pass laws in breach of the, if you like, our treaty obligations without having negotiated
If we have to do that, yes, but I'm in favour of a quick negotiation, as Mr Rasmussen indicated, was possible and desirable, and I think we can do that.
I'm sorry to push on, and I know this is painful detail, but my understanding is Vote Leave want to do it not giving the EU 18 months or 2 years to sort out the deal. They want to do it in a few weeks. Well, but there's no way we're going to sort it out in 3 or 4 weeks, is there? I mean, that's completely pie in the sky.
If we need to make it clear that we are a self-governing parliamentary democracy, and we need to pass legislation to achieve that, we should do it. That is our birthright, our heritage, our tradition, and something we have a last chance to recover on Thursday.
Lord Howard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, one striking development in the last few days, big movements in the markets, apparently predicting that the odds of a Remain win have strengthened. The pound has soared, the FTSE had its best day for 4 months, and the bookies' odds have shifted. The betting market had put the chance of a Brexit win above 40% last week. Yesterday, Brexit was seen as having a 33% of chance of prevailing. Today, it's down to 25%. The polls, including a couple tonight, seem less certain, but maybe something has changed. A late swing to the status quo, that's something we often see in referenda, but there could also, of course, be a Jo Cox effect. For a 5th day today, the campaign has been affected by her death, with Parliament recalled to hear moving tributes from her colleagues. Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to Professor John Curtis, the pollster, and began by asking him the current state of play in the referendum.
It's perhaps worth reminding ourselves where we seem to be towards the end of last week before the tragic murder of Jo Cox. We'd just seen a whole sequence of opinion polls that were the worst figures for Remain and the best figures for Leave at any stage during this campaign. And for the first time, perhaps a real prospect that Remain were on the consensus of the opinion polls behind. Then at the weekend, we saw the polls move back again to some degree, though even then the polls being done over the internet were saying it was a 50-50 call, which is what they've been saying during most of the campaign. And we had one telephone poll putting the Remain side narrowly ahead. Now, tonight we have 2 more polls. One internet poll from YouGov, which puts Leave narrowly ahead. Another one from ORB, a phone poll, depending a bit on how you interpret it, but again, it looks like a narrow lead for Remain. So we are frankly looking at a referendum which is still extraordinarily tight, though maybe not quite so bad for Remain as it looked 5 or 6 days ago.
So the markets, the prediction markets and the bookies basically thinking it's a 25% chance of Brexit now, which has diminished very, very rapidly. Are they underestimating the Brexit problem?
I think the truth is that they are now seriously underestimating the possibility of a vote to leave, given that most of the recent opinion polls we've been having are saying it's somewhere between maybe 49% for Remain and about 52% for Remain. I would suggest something like 40 or 45% would be a more serious and sensible probability for the prospect of leave at this juncture.
Right. Now, clearly something has changed from the worst polls that Remain had last week. Joe Cox effect? Or is that a late swing effect? Because people were saying maybe there'll be a late swing. I mean, it often happens.
Well, I think the truth is it's impossible to tell whether there's a Joe Cox effect. There's nothing direct in the opinion polls to support that. Maybe there's been a little bit of movement back towards Remain, but perhaps we shouldn't also just simply discount the most boring hypothesis of all, which is that maybe last week the polls happened all to slightly exaggerate Leave's position, and that maybe not a great deal has ever happened at all, though I think in truth probably Remain's position still looks somewhat weaker than it did certainly before we got into the pre-election period since May 27. Since then, if you look across the piece, the polls just have not looked quite so good for Remain as they did beforehand.
John Curtis, thanks very much. Well, our political editor, Nick Watt, joins me now. Nick, you were in the Commons today for what was a very special day, remembering Joe Cox.
Yes, I mean, there were very powerful scenes in the House of Commons as Joe Cox's closest parliamentary colleagues paid a warm tribute to her. But really the most poignant moment was when there were often moments of complete silence in the chamber of the House of Commons, and all you could hear were the voices of her 3- and 5-year-old making the noises that any 3- or 5-year-old makes when their father, in this case, or their grandparent is reading a book to them. Now, the referendum obviously wasn't directly addressed in these tributes, but it was never far away. And there was real anger today amongst Tory Vote Leave supporters at the way in which they believe that the Prime Minister is seeking to use the death of Joe Cox to sort of bolster the Remain side. They cite his Sunday Telegraph article in which the Prime Minister praised her work for the Remain campaign. And there was one former Tory Cabinet Minister I spoke to who was still wearing his white Rose of Yorkshire as a mark of respect to Joe Cox, and he said that the Prime Minister had walked across a line and had behaved in a disgusting way. Now, the Vote Leave leadership had to send out a message this afternoon. They've got a WhatsApp group to communicate with their supporters, and they said to their side, do not say anything, hold your horses. This is a time for silence on this particular issue.
But does the behind-the-scenes annoyance with the Prime Minister, do you think that indicates anything about their worries and anxieties about how this is going in this last week?
I think it shows that the Vote Leave side are now nervous because they appeared to be moving some way ahead in the polls, and now the polls are more difficult to read. It's interesting, I was speaking last week to a Brexit minister who said it is all over, bar the shouting, we have won. I spoke to that same minister again today. He said, I still think we're going to win, but there were a few more caveats. But, important to say, the Remain side are also very nervous. They thought they'd won on the economy, and they know that Vote Leave have had a great run on immigration.
Nick, thanks very much indeed. Well, there is so much to talk about in the referendum, and now so little time. Much of the campaign has, of course, been devoted to a relatively short playlist of issues. But you might remember that last week we had been taking Newsnight travelling, a short road trip through the UK, to get some fresh perspectives on the EU debate. That was put on hold, obviously, because of events. But could we at least retrieve one last stop of our trip? For obvious reasons, the journey of the Newsnight truck and our referendum road trip was suspended, along with all campaigning, on Thursday. We had started in Glasgow and Stornoway last Monday, made stops in Middlesbrough and Leicester before pausing. The schedule had the truck ending its journey in the southern resort town of Bognor Regis on Friday. And we decided to keep to that date with just a brief visit to the town to record some material on its perspective on the referendum. A debate about the future of Britain, the weather didn't let us down. We didn't have time to stop at the famous Butlins, one of 3 in the country, but we did get to see the Victorian Pier and the sea. The beaches are proud to regularly fly the European blue flag, certifying cleanliness and safety. The south coast is physically closer to the continent than most of the country, and Bognor is not alone among towns here in fostering connections across the channel. But politically, the local constituency is Conservative and is one where UKIP performed well at the last election, with 22% of the vote. Now, you don't need me to tell you that the demographics of seaside towns are often skewed to the elderly. The Bognors of the world make a great place to retire. But the sea does also offer attractions to youthful visitors as well. Here, it turns out there are more of the old than the young, but still there's nowhere better to think about what kind of generational divide exists in attitudes to the EU. Our policy editor, Chris Cook, came down here to find out.
When the votes are tallied on Thursday night, a lot of seaside towns will end up as strong supporters of Leave. And Bognor Regis on the Sussex coast is likely to be one of them.
Now, Bognor is perhaps best known as a holiday resort despite its sometimes unreliable weather. But it's also got unusual demographics that make it prime territory for Leave. For one thing, we know that people with fewer qualifications, be they academic or technical, are more likely to vote for Leave. And here in Bognor, only 28% of people have any sort of significant post-secondary qualification, as opposed to 37% of the country at large. We also know that people who earn less are more likely to vote for Leave. And here in Bognor, the average wage is around £475 a week. That's £50 a week less than the national average. It's a full £100 a week less than the average for the southeast of England. Finally, and this is the big one for Bognor, we also know that older people are more likely to vote for Leave. And here in Bognor, around 30% of people are aged over 60. Nationally, that figure is only 22%. A recent poll by Populus implies that if the population was split 50-50 on Brexit, around 69% of under 24s would vote for Remain. Conversely, 62% of over 65s would vote for Leave, almost the exact reverse. You can see that split when you talk to members of the town's Bowls League. How do you intend to vote at the referendum?
Out. 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 I've not spoken to one who wants to stay in. With all the immigration, all the benefits, the hospitals straining at the seams, all the cancelled operations, and as I said about the schools and everything.
So you don't trust Mark Carney or the Chancellor or the Prime Minister or Martin Lewis or any of these people when they say we'll be poorer if we leave the EU?
No.
No, not really. No. They don't know any more than we do they? Really?
No, they don't.
Really, do they?
Well, I mean, the Governor of the Bank of England is a specialist economist, central banker, brought in from Canada to help run our economy, and he thinks it's a bad idea.
Yeah, but does he know what it's like to go around Sainsbury's shopping or into where all people that are on benefits are spending tokens and, you know, does he know what it's like?
One of the things nationally is that we think younger people are going to be more likely to vote Remain.
I think so. It's their future, you see. They don't know the history
What it was like in the past,
do they? Because they don't know anything
We've known it a different way, you see, so that's what we're falling back on, because we knew as it was.
We asked this not quite retired Remainer, who chairs a local business, why he thinks older people tend to be pro-Leave.
I see it with my mother's generation, that they really feel somehow threatened by all the immigrants around. They think that's changed the character of the place. But the health service and the care homes they're going to end up in just couldn't function without some immigration.
We caught up with some sporty young people at a local beach who had rather different politics to their older neighbours.
Of your friends who you know are voting, what do you think the balance is?
All of them are in. All of them are in. I can't see any idea why you would want to be out.
Why is it you think that older people generally tend to disagree with younger people?
In more of that generation, more geared towards having Britain as more independent before the EU was really fully formed. And with our generation, we're much more about travelling, much more about being free, much more about creating a wider community around the world.
The reason why I'm voting for is I think the deal that we have at the moment with Europe is great. You know, free movement of labour, especially for water sports enthusiasts like us, benefits us massively. It means that we can go and work in any country in Europe without having to get a visa, and for us especially, that's a real benefit. The reason to leave the EU is to control immigration. That seems to be a real emotional standpoint to take, and I think, honestly, are we really going to curtail immigration that much? And if we are, is that going to have an economic consequence?
Is immigration a problem for people your age?
No, I don't think it is at all. I think it's ridiculous that it's even considered a problem.
The local UKIP chair explains why he thinks young people are pro-Remain.
The young people have been very badly served by the politicians. I don't think the politicians have been open and honest about the issues. They've fought a fear campaign which has been devoid of the facts.
On Thursday, one generation will prevail. Family arguments might be more ferocious this year than ever.
Chris Cook there. Well, I am joined by three local people, all at the more elderly end of the spectrum, all over the age of 60. Thank you all very much for joining us here on this windswept bandstand. Look, first of all, why do you think there is this age gap between the younger and the older in attitudes to the EU? Jane?
I think that people of my age can remember before we joined the European Economic Community, and we were able to manage. The Economic Community was a good thing, but we could probably manage again.
And you're veering to out, aren't you, I think?
Yes, I haven't made up my mind completely, but I'd like to be convinced either way.
I've yet to be convinced there is necessarily a strict divide between the old and the young, but I tend to agree with what Jane says, is that I think the young people haven't necessarily experienced what has gone before and haven't seen that Britain can perfectly easily survive. And the world isn't going to fall in if we come out of the European Union.
Steve, you've got your own sign writing business.
Yes, I have.
But you're a Remain.
I think there's been a lot of pontificating about the benefits of leaving, and to the detriment of the strengths that we've been living with for a long time and just take for granted now. And I think taking it for granted is a massive mistake which we could fall into if there is this sway to leave the European market.
Would it bother you if, let's put it crudely, if the old pulled us out of the EU and the young had wanted to stay in? I mean, people say, is it a problem if England votes us out and Scotland wants to stay in? But is it a problem if you guys take us out and the young wanted to be in? Does that bother you, Jane?
I think it's a very important point, because they are the ones that have to make it work, whatever we decide. But I'm thinking beyond the next 5 or 10 years, which I don't think the politicians are. And I'm thinking for my grandchildren, who are now in age 8 to 13. I think it's, in a way, it may be their only chance to be out of it.
I agree with that. This will be the only chance they will get, because I don't think there will be another chance.
If we look at the issues in this campaign, mostly immigration and the economy have been talked about a great deal. Do we think the elderly put more weight on immigration as an issue? Steve?
My generation and slightly older than me have to think about, as we get older and we're all now expected to live until 80 plus, who's going to be looking after us?
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, Jane, Hugh, I mean, that is a paradox, isn't it? Because care workers are disproportionately...
Yes, but I really seriously think this is a non-issue, because immigration, for example, myself, I know lots of immigrants around here who are truly excellent people, and they do a terrific job and they're real assets to the community. Similarly, I know some who are not. All that is being asked in relation to the European Union or anywhere else is that we are able to choose those people who come in here. That means that we will still have the excellent people coming here.
Those who say that it's not an issue have their heads in the sand. We are a small country. We can't keep going forever.
Can you imagine if we come out that we retreat a little bit as a nation? Maybe we don't build high-speed 2, we don't build a third runway at Heathrow. Do you see these kinds of things as connected? I'm just interested in your bigger vision of Britain.
Yeah.
The future of Britain, as can happen outside the EU or probably even inside the EU. There is a tremendous future for Britain, as there is for a lot of other countries. And I don't really see that makes a lot of difference. But I am very positive about the many excellent things that Britain can do if it is able to trade freely with all the other countries of the world, instead of just being restricted to the EU.
Whatever the outcome may be, and I'm passionate about the Remain in because of all the benefits that it will bring the future generations of our children and their children as it goes forward, because the strength that it will give all of us, I beg a belief that we can see ourselves as little Englanders being run by politicians that have got no vision, no imagination.
Not at all. This little Englander thing kind of irritates me in a sense, because we're not little Englanders, we are Great Britain, and Great Britain can survive perfectly well, as David Cameron has said, inside or outside the EU.
Do you think Britain was a better country in the days before we were ever a member? Yes or no?
No.
No. So you're not in any way attached to the past? It's nothing about that. Last question. Is there an emotional bond, do you think, that young people have towards Europe? Do you think that it's possible that younger people feel more European in identity?
I think
a bit more, at least. They're not clearly completely, but a bit more European identity, the ability to travel there, friends there, maybe get a job and hang out there.
It's all
more than your generation,
they know.
Jane.
It's all they know. So yes, I think they do have
they've been born and bred into it. It's a no-brainer that they are European, and their understanding of what Europe is all about is what they've lived through, what they've been educated in, what they've seen, what they've experienced. Full stop.
We're going to leave it there. Hugh, Jane, Stephen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And we carried on in our great British way through the thunder and the rain. Now, you may not have made up your mind yet. In the recent polls, the undecideds have been averaging 13%. Anyway, through the campaign, we've been helping you make up your mind by letting some engaging people, who are campaigners, set out their argument for or against leaving. We're in the last legs now and have to make sure we get to Thursday having balanced up the quota on each side. Tonight, our My Decision slot goes to the founder of lastminute.com and the philanthropist Martha Lane Fox.
I'm wildly pro-Europe, both for reasons that are from my heart and reasons that are from my head. And if I had to describe the two, I guess I'd say that my head reasons are based around my experiences as an entrepreneur and a business person, and now a social entrepreneur, and the experience that I've had in the technology sector. You know, no surprises, you spend your entire time in technology thinking about how to connect the world more, how to scale things, how to grow, how to use something that's small and local and help reach a global market. And the idea that you would retract into a smaller place is just something so countercultural in my working life. But my heart part is more important, I believe, and more dominant actually in my thinking and my decision making. And you know, I so strongly believe that we should always be part of a discussion, and that inclusion is a better position to take than exclusion. Where do you sit in the voting in or out campaign? I think like any enormous system in any country and any political structure, things can improve and change. And if I look at it from my own perspective, the technology world is still a pretty bureaucratic organisation. I'm not sure it's very digitally forward. I know when I visited Brussels, the Commission is full of paper. There is lots of kind of change and excitement that I think you could reorganise around the internet. But I'm not sure that's just particular to Brussels. I think it's particular to most political systems. And fear that I would have is that we have lost an ability to impact the most important debates of our times, and we need to have as big a voice as possible to solve the big challenges, whether that is climate change or whether that is, you know, the mass migration of peoples, or whether that's gender equality, or whether that's technological shifts. And I fear for us as a country that we are looking backwards, not forwards, and that we would become much diminished.
Martha Lane Fox's My Decision. Well, that's it for tonight. Emily will be at Wembley tomorrow for the really, really big referendum debate. But we leave you in Cardiff with a celebration of the Welsh football team's third goal against Russia, which left them, and not England, winning Group B at the European Championship. Not bad, as the comedian David Schneider noted, for a country that is roughly the size of Wales. Good night.
Good evening.